Hello, hello, and welcome back. It's time for Leading Women in Tech. I'm your host, Tony Collis, and today I am talking to Vanessa Jupe. Vanessa is the CEO and founder of her company, Leva, which is all about supporting mums in the workplace. We had a wonderful conversation. I felt like it was one of those conversations where I was like, we're not done. But it's time to wrap this up. There are so many questions which I didn't ask her, which I wish we'd had time to talk about. But we talked about how as mums, we lose our identity a little bit. The impact that being a new mum can have on cognitive function and emotional resilience and what we can do about that. The feeling of loneliness on, I'm never going to be myself again. And more than anything, I want you to hear today's conversation as permission to feel a bit out of your depth if you're a new mum, or if you're planning to be a mum, or if you're supporting mums as a manager. I mean, I'm not a mum myself, but I support a lot of women through my coaching, but also my team. And I really want us to normalize these conversations. And I'm hoping that today's conversation starts that change. Let's normalize conversations about what actually happens when somebody has a child for the first time or the second time. What happens to morale? What happens in the workplace? Vanessa had a very disturbing statistic, which is that maternal health currently costs $18 billion a year, but worse than that, there are 3 times more suicide attempts today than there were 10 years ago in North America. That speaks to how urgent it is that we tackle this topic. And I promise you, it's not all doom and gloom in this episode. There's some laughter, there's some joy, as well as some realistic insights into what really goes on, what to expect, and what you can do to support yourself. So without further ado, let's bring Vanessa onto the show. Welcome to the show, Vanessa.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's an absolute delight. And I can't wait to dig on in. But let's start with one of the questions I ask everybody. Tell us about your career journey today, the highlights, the lowlights, and why you do what you do today.
Absolutely. So early on in my career, I was a web developer, and I really loved doing things with HTML, CSS, all of that, and solving problems. That was what was so fun about it. You could create something that solved a problem for someone, and you could see them using it. And it just really was so satisfying to have that hands-on experience and know you're doing something that's making a difference. And then I kind of organically moved into product management. It wasn't like a chosen path, but it was an emerging field in the digital space. And so for many years, I ended up working in different product roles in entertainment at DirecTV, and then in financial services at USAA and H&R Block, which are large companies here in the United States. And I had an opportunity to kind of like grow teams and lead teams and build teams from scratch, which was really, really rewarding. Some of the highlights, I got to work on a voice-assisted search product, so natural language processing and things like that at DirecTV. Built my very first team all around supporting entertainment content and strategy, which was so fun. And then at USAA, I got to lead the team that built out a new investment product, which was really neat. And being able to do a lot of research with our team and our members, is what the USAA client base is called, because they're military members and their families, being able to research with them and understand their pain points and needs and be able to create something in a language that they understood and with vocabulary they understood to make investing less scary was really, really rewarding. And then at H&R Block, I led the do-it-yourself tax team. So if you need to do taxes online, that's what my team managed. And really smart folks that were super ambitious and found really cool ways to make the experience better, as well as generate additional revenue for the company that, things we had never done. So really fun to do innovative things with really smart, awesome people. Some lowlights, I think more around, as a new mom, I was on maternity leave and got passed over for a promotion at the company I was working for at the time, which was really disappointing. And it's just things like that, more interpersonal stuff that I feel like women often get treated differently than men because we are opinionated or assertive. So those are some of the lowlights that I'm sure we'll get into at some point.
Yeah. And that we're treated differently. How did that bring you to what you do today?
So it's an interesting journey. I have a company called Leva, which is all about supporting new moms in their lives and careers. And so it's really that transition into parenthood and ensuring that your career doesn't get off track, but that you're also able to do all of the things that you have to do as a new mother. So there's a lot we're not prepared for. Like we go to school and we get training to do development. We get training to run a business. But when you're a new mom, no one gives you really good training about how do you keep this baby alive? What does breastfeeding look like? How do you do that successfully? What do you expect from a sleep perspective? And how can you get help around that? So that's what my company is really focused on. And a lot of it was because of how jarring that experience was for me personally.
Yeah.
Like breastfeeding, for example, I struggled with that so much. It was so unnatural for me. It feels like it's supposed to be the most natural thing in the world and it's great for your baby, but I had a really hard time with it. And it was one of those things that really frustrated me. And I became kind of obsessed with like figuring out how does this work and how can I do it right? And what are the different like experts I can talk to? And it's one of the very few areas of the human body that doesn't have a medical specialization in the same way that like your heart may.
Wow.
And we know a lot more about the breast when it's cancerous than we do the normal function of a woman's breast. So anyway, that's just one like tiny rabbit hole of information in the world that I found so disturbing. Like, why is this not something that we care more about?
Yeah, if it was a man's breast, we would be paying attention, right?
We totally know everything about it. We'd have little blue pills that they could take and they would just inject milk like no one's business. It would be crazy.
That's crazy. Yeah, I did not know that. I mean, there's so many things in medical science where there's that gender bias, and there's a lot of research done on something that is male and female, but only in the male's body, and or things like the prostate and the penis and the testes, which only men have. There's tons of research around how they function, what goes wrong with them when they break, why do they not work. It is fascinating to me that there's next to nothing about breasts. I mean, I know like even just our ovaries and our womb, the focus has been on like, why can't you get pregnant rather than anything else? It's like your fertility is broken and therefore that's bad for men rather than it being about us. Oh God, that's a whole rabbit hole, isn't it? Right there.
Yeah, no, you're so spot on. It's funny, not funny. A company I previously worked at, I'm going to do my best to maybe not name names, but they didn't have a maternity leave policy. So it was a large company. And finally, like the last year I was there, I didn't have my baby there. Thankfully, I had my baby at a place where there was a parental leave policy, but this company didn't have one. And they finally introduced one the year I left. And I was like, oh, well, good for them. I'm so excited. They have this now. And one of the HR people later, after she left the company, told me it was because so many men were complaining about not having paternity leave that they finally introduced maternity and paternity leave. Like, all right.
Wow.
So to your point about like, if it impacts men, then they'll do more 100%.
That's insane. I mean, this day and age, I mean, I think it's great that we're getting parental leave. Men are getting that. I think that is absolutely foundational to women being able to thrive. But to only bring in the policy at that point, like,
right.
Wow. Then the whole maternity leave thing and it baffles me. Anyway, that's a whole other discussion for another day. But let's focus on supporting mums in the workplace. What do you see the main challenges that they're facing? Like, where have you seen there being big problems that you need to address?
I think there's so much that happens once you have a baby that you're unprepared for again. And a lot of that does go back to how does it impact your career? Mm-hmm. So I think on one hand, flexibility and knowing like how do I advocate for myself and what is okay, what is acceptable. And thankfully in the US, we've recently introduced different acts that support time away to pump breast milk, and having to have a clean space that's not a bathroom, for example, that you can lock so you can pump breast milk. And so things like that, I think, are really important. But that's something I know about because this is the field I work in. It's not something most women, are educated on because why would they be? Yeah. So I think for companies, they really need to make sure that they're supporting their female employees and educating them and maybe working with other groups that specialize in that and have that area of expertise to be able to say like, well, you actually do have time. You can have 20-minute breaks to go express milk. You should be doing that 3 times a day while you're at work if you work like 8 to 5, because that's optimal for your milk supply to not get diminished. And that there needs to be a refrigerator. And so it's all of these things that you just don't know about. So that's on the breastfeeding front. And then after you have a baby, most people are not sleeping the way that they're used to. Most women are running off of just a few hours of sleep a night and compound that over weeks or months. Like that has a huge impact on your cognitive function and on your emotional resilience. And so that is something to be prepared for and to also kind of plan around and just having someone to talk to. I think having a coach of some kind that you can talk to that can really help you understand like it's okay and it's normal and no, you won't always be like this. Yeah. You'll actually be back to yourself or whatever this new version of you will be over time. And you're totally okay. I think is one thing that is super, super helpful. But I know like personally for me, when I went back to work, I'm used to being high functioning. I think most of us are that work in, corporate. And so I felt like I had gone back to work, and because of the lack of sleep and hormone changes, suddenly I felt like I had lost 50% of my IQ. And it was so hard to like follow a conversation, make decisions. And normally I'm like the first one, like with like quick thoughts, and I'm like having ideas, and I'm sitting here like, oh my gosh, what happened to me? Am I ever going to be myself again? And the answer is yes. Fortunately, it's just going to take time. And so I think some of those things could just be helpful, and then the ability to have a plan when you go back to work. You need to have a plan around like, what are you going to do with your baby? Who's going to watch your baby? When are you going to be in the office, out of the office? When do you have to pick baby up, or is your childcare at home? And so that's covered. And just having that plan of like, who's going to cover your work for you when you go out on leave? Like, who are those point people? How often are you going to keep in touch? In the United States, I know it's different than in the UK because you guys have keep in touch days. And here, that's not something that we offer. There's this crazy belief that you're not supposed to be in contact with your office at all.
I know. I get baffled by this when I've got clients who are like, yeah, I'm not going to be in contact at all. And I'm like, that would drive me insane.
Yes.
Like, because it's like our jobs. I mean, if you've got a good job that you love, which is what I do, is help people find jobs they love. And I think we should have that. If we're going to spend all our time doing it, we should love it. Then taking that away from you is like part of your identity is being taken. And it doesn't surprise me that so many women feel like they lose their identity when they have babies. They just become mom, and there's nothing wrong with that if that's what you want. But I think a lot of women feel that society tells them they should just be mom, but resent it quietly, deeply inside. Do you hear?
Yes. Oh my God. I agree with you so much. There's what is that quote? Most men lead lives of quiet desperation. I think women do that times 10. I think especially moms, to your point, like, oh, I'm supposed to be a mom. I'm supposed to be happy being a mom. I'm supposed to be fulfilled as a mom. And that's all I'm supposed to do. But I had this 10-year career, 15-year career where I was more than that or different than that. Why can't I have both?
Especially in this era when many of us are having babies later because we want a career first. We want to have built ourselves to a point. And, many of the women, amazing women I work with, have deliberately got themselves to a particular stage so that they can sit at that senior leadership level for a couple of years while they have babies. It's a deliberate choice. Yeah. And then they're going to pick back up again. And it's important to them. It is a slow down. It's not a pause. It's not a break. It's a slow down to accommodate this new aspect of their life that's important to them. But it doesn't define them. And yet society says, this should define you. The workplace says, you're a mom, don't bother coming back, even though we have a legal right now to return to work and stuff like that. But we still have that behavior of, you're a mom now, that comes first.
Yeah.
And are these conversations that you're having with women, like this frustration of this tension in their lives?
Absolutely. And I think, a lot of women make a decision after they have a baby to either quit work because of what you're talking about, because they feel like they can't balance both, or they have this lack of identity now. They have this crisis of who am I? And they feel compelled to take care of the child and try to figure things out. Or a lot of them leave the company that they're with because they don't feel they have the support anymore. Yeah. And they feel like they're viewed differently, and they are afraid of staying there. So they'd rather go start over somewhere else as this new version of themselves, which I think is just a damn shame, because the company is losing such a valuable resource, especially women that have been there for a year plus. They know the job, good at the job. Most women, I think most of us would agree with this, are generally better at what they do than men, because we've had to work so hard to be at that same level.
Yeah. I think it's more that to compete, we have to be better than them, right? And so it's not that I would say men are less good than women overall. It's more that as peers, we are better because the standards are unfair. And it's not that those men can't get up there. It's just unfair.
They haven't been expected to. Yeah, they haven't had to. I agree. I mean, like in 100 years from now, we'll see how the society goes. In the US, it's not going so well, but pretend it is. In 100 years from now, maybe we'll be at the same point where we're the same, because we haven't had to.
I mean, the optimist in me is like, it's going to be within my lifetime. The pessimist in me is like, yeah, no.
always an optimist. Let's go with
I know,
that.
right? We have to hope, right? Otherwise, like, it is just, especially in the current climate, it feels like there is.
You can get dragged down.
Yeah, I know. You have to maintain. I hope listeners feel that, like, hold on to your hope, whatever hope you've got, because otherwise the world is a miserable place. But let's just, you mentioned something interesting there about women leaving, going either exiting the industry altogether, and especially for my audience, which there many of them are high flying leaders, like exiting the industry is a cost to the industry, not to the individual companies. But then there's also just moving companies. And this is where I wanted to ask you, what are the benefits of a company bringing in somebody like you to help support women better? The big one, obvious one in my mind, is this cost of exodus. But like, what else can we talk about here? Like, why should companies invest in this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are a lot of reasons. To your point about the cost, so we know that over 40%, there are some studies that put the number at 45% of women leave the workforce within the first year of having a baby. They leave the company they're with. So not the workforce altogether, but the company they're with. And so if you think about that, that's like dramatic. That is a dramatic impact on an organization. Regardless of the size of the company, you're losing a significant amount of your workforce just because someone had a baby.
Yeah.
And then the cost to replace an employee often is 200% of the salary of that employee. So then you're not only looking at, I lost someone that really had this knowledge about our organization and was a high performer. I'm having to replace them, having to find someone, train them, the time it takes to find them. I mean, that's a massive economic burden on an organization. Then the other things that like this impacts employee morale because you're losing people. The company, the other women and parents at the company are seeing that parents at this organization are not being supported. So that does not improve morale. This is such a negative situation. I'm sure we all know, like, hey, if somebody should be fired, they should be let go. They're not performing well. The sooner you can do that, the better. And that positively impacts morale. But when you see really talented folks leaving, that it has the opposite impact on employee morale. And then in the United States, there's a massive, massive cost that employers are bearing because they're not giving the right level of mental health support to new moms. And they're also not giving any lactation support to new parents. And so it's billions of dollars that are affecting, like in aggregate, employers' health plan costs, which are really, really high, high cost burdens because all of these issues are not discovered early and the moms aren't getting support. And so maternal mental health alone is like $18 billion a year.
Wow.
Because it's not caught early enough. And then an event happens and then it's dealt with when it's ridiculously expensive to get treatment. So if employers were able to realize like, oh, just by working with, our Leva is one of the few companies that are as holistic as we are because we do offer lactation, mental health, career coaching, nutrition, sleep, et cetera. So it's really holistic. So if we were to say, oh, I could actually prevent a lot of this expense by having a company like this come in, train our managers and support the new parents in our organization, like that's a massive improvement that they could be making to their bottom line. And there are other companies out there that focus really specifically on lactation or really specifically on mental health. So there are a lot of different options out there. We're just really focused on like this holistic care for the parents.
Yeah. Obviously my audience is very heavily North America, but we have a very global audience. And I would say even in Europe where, depending on the country, you get between 6 months and 2 years off maternity leave, which sounds amazing.
It does.
But it's a double-edged sword in that I think a lot of women feel like they can't go back to work because there is zero lactation support. Like I've known women in the UK who wanted to go back to work sooner, but because it's expected, one, you're expected to be off. And so it's frowned upon, like, why aren't you home?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's there. Not in every organization, not in every industry, but it's definitely there. Like, why are you back at work? Especially if it's pre 6 months. After 6 to 12 months, especially 9 to 12 months, that's a normal time. So it's less frowned upon. I've had people tell me that when people like think I have children, people will tell me that one of the worst things about the thing I do, which is supporting women, is that I'm encouraging women to put their careers first and not their parenthood first. And I'm like, whoa, okay. So, you've got that, but also because there's this expectation that you're home, there are plenty of mums who will lactate until, the child is at least a couple of years old, if not older. And because you're expected to be home, there is zero support here. And the mental health one is also an interesting one. Like, we have the NHS, don't get me wrong, that's got its problems, big problems, but it is great in other respects. But it makes the companies, I think, forget the cost to them. The cost to them of women not having good mental health. And this, I would say this is across Europe, right? Where we've got every country has its own different healthcare regime. But much of it is not on the employer's burden. The burden on the employer, though, is the sick days. You don't accrue sick days here in the same way that you do in North America. They aren't earned. They are just, you're sick, you get time off. It's paid time off. Even if it's not paid time off, it's time away. So we're not tackling things like mental health. I think the world over needs to be focused on this because we know that maternal mental health is a really big issue, actually.
Right.
It's huge.
It is. There are 3 times more suicide attempts now than there were 10 years ago.
Wow.
In North America. So it's a massive problem. It's a massive problem.
I did not know that. That's heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking. It is. It really is. Yeah. And we're just, it's a terrible thing. I mean, it's a terrible thing because what happens after a baby's born is like the mom was going for all of these checkups, to make sure that the baby's healthy, that she's healthy, that everything's fine up until that moment of delivery. And then after delivery, it kind of flips where the mom may have one checkup and that's like a couple weeks postpartum.
And that's it.
And that's it.
I know. It's the same
And then
here.
the nutrition appointments. Yeah. But no one's checking on mom.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety. By the way, the only thing we've really studied is postpartum depression, which is why we have data around that. But there are other postpartum conditions like OCD and anxiety that we don't know as much about.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that is exacerbated if you've had previous mental health issues, which I'm sure many people across the world have had. And so it's just so incredibly subpar. And a lot of the time that postpartum depression kicks in, it's, after baby comes. And a lot of what we see is that 6 months to a year after baby comes is really when the suicide attempts occur. So I'm very, very focused on this now because it's something that we've seen a lot of and we've had a lot of personal experience with in our company, not ourselves, but just within our families and our friend groups. So I think there's just so much more that we need to be doing to pay attention to this.
Yeah, that I have not heard that stat before. I mean, I train coaches as well. And one of the things we go through as part of the training is suicide awareness and suicide prevention as much as we can as coaches. But there's a limit as a coach. Like mostly it's about recognizing it and getting that person in front of the right help, which is not coaching. But I had not realized it was that profound. The other thing I hear quite a lot about from just friends is PTSD after traumatic births. And we just don't recognize it. But it's full-on PTSD that is not diagnosed by the medical profession as a direct result of their birth experience and often caused by the medical interventions.
Yes.
And it's not talked about.
It's not. Thank you for bringing it up. It does need to be. And that is a huge trigger for people.
Yeah. One of the other things I wanted to just ask you was, do you also support people that don't identify as moms, but who are the birth parent? Is that something that you're dealing with as well?
So we have, we just adjusted a lot of our experience for Father's Day, where we added support for fathers and non-birthing parents and caregivers. So in the experience, the parent can choose, are they mom, dad, other/caregiver? And so based on that flow, the content kind of adjusts and changes. But I would say the majority of our focus really has been on mom and supporting mom and language around that. So it's been an interesting balance trying to figure out how do we support truly this very specific target, which is the majority, but try to be inclusive and not alienate folks. And I think we're still kind of figuring that out.
Yeah, because I think there's a growing awareness of, more people who don't identify as a woman being the birthing parent. And I think they have an additional burden on them in terms of the mental health, and also less understanding from the people around them at work, because what you're breastfeeding. Yeah. I'm breastfeeding. Just because I don't look like a woman doesn't mean I don't breastfeed. Yeah. And I can see that being an area that we really need to address as a species. We absolutely have to start tackling that. Whether you agree with their life choices or not is actually irrelevant, because we need to support them. To me, that's a no-brainer. But I love that. These people need supporting, and society doesn't accept them the way they are a lot of the time.
I think a lot of the problems that we have in society are because we put so much focus on gender and separating people into these buckets that we've created this ridiculous, to your point, expectation. Like, you're a woman, therefore you should be a mom. And once you're a mom, you should just stay at home with the babies. And it's like, can you be a person that lives in the world?
Why do I have to be all these labels? Exactly right. I mean, you know, I focus on women in tech, and I've chosen to focus on that. And I'm aware it's very limiting. And people that identify as a woman, not, you know, and I say deliberately people that identify as a woman, because I know not everybody who works with us has started their journey that way. And that has its own level of burden. But why do we have these labels? I love the idea that one day my business mission is not necessary because we are no longer obsessed by it. That would be amazing. People might think that's a weird thing to say as a business owner, but like, I'd love that.
No, I think it's great. I think it's very like egalitarian, because then we'd be living in a more fair and equal society that it would be a focus. But I think, I mean, what categorization exists to keep people in specific buckets so that we can kind of have them where we want them, you know? And I think that's the case for women, unfortunately. Maybe that's a little bit too dramatic or bleak.
I know, I think it's spot on. I didn't expect to go down this rabbit hole with you, like, but it is spot on for this conversation about being a mom, because being a mom is like this super pushy bucket of, this is now who you are. Everything else around you is irrelevant. It is about your children and nothing else. I remember like when I was younger, first of all, like when I was single, it was like, oh, you need to get a partner, you need to get a partner, you need to get, like, I was getting set up all the time. Then when I found my now husband, it was like, when are you getting married? When are you getting married? Oh my God. And then as soon as we got married, it's like, when are you having babies? And I'm like, the pressure is insane. And I remember in my late 30s, suddenly starting to get people going, oh, so you've not got children yet? Oh, you're leaving it too late. And these are complete strangers who know nothing about me. They don't know why I've not had children. And quite frankly, it's none of their business. And it is mind-boggling to me that in this day and age, we still are treated that way. And so I don't have kids, but I know from my clients, but I can only imagine what it must be like firsthand to experience the next level, which is you're now a mom. Oh, you know. Let's talk about how being a mother changes your identity. What do you feel like? Well, what happens? And what can we do better to support women in this change, this transition that they go through, and allowing them to hopefully hold on to a bit of themselves if they wish to?
I think you hit on it so well earlier, which is that it shouldn't replace who you are. And you said you've coached so many women that are high flyers, like executives, high achievers, and they have built a lot of their identity around their career. That's who they are, right? It's a huge part of who they are. And yet when you become a mom, it's not supposed to be, right? You're supposed to be just completely doting on your child, which is insane. It shouldn't be that way. I don't know about you, like in your client base, but so many people that I've spoken with have told me that it was 5 years into being a mom that they felt like they knew who they were again. So it completely eradicates your identity for most women. It's like, oh, shoot, I was this, now I'm this. And who am I? How do I balance this? What does it even look like? So it's a huge journey. And I think there's, the basic thing, what can you do? I think talk to people, seek help. You're not alone. You don't need to be alone. Everything there can be discussed and should be discussed if you're having like concerns or worries. Many people have been there before and can help guide you through it. And then for organizations, I think there's a huge benefit to offering flexibility. Most of the time in the US, companies don't offer flexible work schedules or part-time schedules. But for women that have had that opportunity, it has been a massive game changer for them to be able to do part-time work for a period of time after their baby comes. And so that allows them to get back to work early. It allows them to stay happily engaged in their work and still figure out what they're doing as a new mom. I wish more companies would offer that, because I think that's probably like one of the top things that parents in general would want, moms and dads. But I think still we live in a world where the burden is on the mom. And especially like if they're trying to nurse and all of that, it would be important. And I think it could be a benefit to companies as well, because then you're not having to pay necessarily like a full 100% salary to someone. You could offer them half their salary and give them half time. And that would be a win for everyone. But yeah, I think there is a massive change in identity. And to what you were saying earlier, like I didn't decide to become a parent until my late 30s. I was I was focused on my career. I really loved what I did. I wanted to build this successful career. And then I was living in my hometown. I was working for this great company. I was an executive. My husband and I were both making really good money. And we felt like, oh, everything's wonderful. But I never, ever, ever in my life had a goal of be a mom. It was always like, have a great life, travel, have a career. And then once I got to that point, I was like, maybe I should think about being a mom. It might be really fun to like raise this wonderful child and have all of these cool experiences with them, because we've done it, right? Like we've done the weddings, we've done all the things, all the life events, the college, all that stuff. I was like, wouldn't it be neat to have a child to be able to have all of those wonderful experiences with and share the world with them? I did not expect it to change my life the way it did. I did not expect, I'm probably the last person that should run a business about moms, because I did not expect to like have mom be this like big identity. I thought I'll have a child and that'll just be part of my life. Just like my husband's part of my life. I'm not identified as a wife, even though I'm a wife, but it was a huge change. And so I think that's what told me.
That's exactly why you should be running this business, because I think, naively, I certainly speaking to clients, I've had the privilege to coach women through maternity leave. They've paused their coaching with me while they've had the baby, and then they've come back to me afterwards. And it's such a privilege. And I think I would 100% agree with you. I don't think many of us actually understand what it's going to be like. And I say this from the outside, not having experienced it myself, just coached people through that.
Yeah.
And so I think, yes, exactly. You are exactly the person who should be running such a business, because it's the same with me, like running a business for women in tech. I had no idea how bad it was going to be. I was one of those who was like, there's bias in society, but it's not really impacting me. And then just, I have enough experiences where you're suddenly like, no, this is not just me. Like, I shouldn't be being held back here. Like, what is going on? And I think sometimes that is exactly what we need when we're being supported as somebody who has had the same experience as us. And I think the people that really need the work you're doing are the people who don't understand. I certainly would not comprehend. Like you said, like my husband's part of my life. He doesn't define me. Right. I'm me first. What I do is me first. And that change, I've seen it in my sister, but I still don't fully comprehend it. Because I don't think
How does she feel about it? Is she happy with it? Is she fine?
I think she's fine. She claims she's fine.
Okay. I think so many women are. I feel like there's like this divergence of, I expect to be a mom. I want to be mom. I want mom to be like my title, versus like, I'm me and I'm doing all these things. And I want a child and I want that to be part of my life. But that's not my title.
I have had conversations with clients. So my sister really, really wanted kids. It was so important to her. So I think that navigated her quite well through it. But I've got clients who, they wanted kids. Like, it was a definite choice. But they are quietly with me. Obviously, I provide a very safe space. That's my job. They're quietly with me, angry. Yeah. Right? They love their kids dearly, and yet they're angry at the same time. And I don't think we acknowledge that being an acceptable thing. It takes so much.
Anger for women is not acceptable. It's ridiculous. It should be acceptable.
Yeah.
Yes.
You should be allowed to like quietly scream into a pillow. And not be frowned upon by society. Like, I say quietly because you don't want to traumatize the kids, but
right. It's not you, sweetie.
But it's not that you should hide it. It's more you don't want to traumatize them. Like, is my reason behind it. I want to make that very clear. I think you have every right to be. People should know that you're upset and hurt, and we shouldn't judge them for it. But we have to be mindful of not traumatizing the children.
It'll be interesting. Like 20 or 30 years from now to see how my kid turns out. I'm so curious, because we talked to him about everything that's going on in the world and why we are doing this business. And we went to Washington, D.C. 2 months ago to advocate for moms and women and maternal health and maternal mental health. And so he was with us. So he's very aware of like our beliefs around equality and how women are treated. So it'll be really interesting to see what kind of grown up he becomes.
You got to hope he's one of these men who paves the way for women.
He tells me, he says that in his lifetime, he's going to make it equal. I'm like, you go, boy.
Love it. We need our male allies, and they start in childhood. So I love that. Okay, let's get back on topic. I do have a very important question I want to make sure we get to, which is, how can women returning to work have a re-entry plan? What needs to be in the re-entry plan?
Absolutely. So I would always recommend working with a coach. I think that's really important. You can do it on your own, but I think it's better if you have someone to help you navigate. Number one, I think it's important to realize that the job that you're going into is not the same as the job you left, because depending on where you are, you've been gone for a period of time. other people have stepped up and stepped in to take on the work that you were doing, the teams that you were leading. And so what you can and should be expecting is that you're going into an elevated role, a role that is above perhaps where you were. And that will actually, I think, set you up for a lot of success down the road. Women that go in with a good reentry plan and go in expecting to be elevated, not expecting to go into the same job, but expecting to be elevated.
That is not something that's talked about enough, actually, because you're spot on. Your team should step up. If you've got a great team that you've coached before you've left, your team should step up. So, of course, you get to step up when you go back. I love that.
You get to step up.
Yeah.
You're stepping up. You're going into the role above where you were, you know? And so you should expect that they're performing at a higher level. And then therefore you get to go in and perform at a higher level. And women that do this and do it well and have a good plan often are promoted, you know, in a fairly rapid time frame after they go back. And so I think having that plan around what does that look like, you know, working with your coach around what was my day-to-day, what would it likely be now, how might I run my meetings differently, like how do I kind of ease back in, I think is really important. And then there's also that, again, figuring out like, what are you going to do time-wise with the baby? What are you going to do time-wise with your pumping schedule? I think those things have to be part of your reentry plan. And I've talked to, oh my gosh, one of the things, this woman, her baby just turned 10. And I was talking to her a couple of years ago. And she said one of her biggest life regrets was that she didn't continue like expressing breast milk when she went back to work because her manager at the time made her feel really bad about it, that she was taking time off to go and pump milk. And I'm like, see, it's just a stupid thing because men never have to worry about it. And yet women do if they're moms. And it's like, you are protected by the law to do that. And if it's something that's important to you because it's important for your own experience of motherhood, you need to make the time to do that. And that should not impact your career and get HR involved if it does, you know, but either way, like those things need to be part of your plan and you need to be communicating that those are your needs and your expectations and blocking time on your calendar.
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the things I highly advocate is like, just block some time on your calendar for these things. I mean, I'm a huge believer in that we need to reduce how many synchronous meetings we all have. I think we're a meeting heavy society. And I think that's one of the reasons why there's an expectation you aren't available, why we have core hours, why even when you work remote, there's like, you know, you have to be available like 9 to 5 or something. I'm like, that is just bonkers. But it's this obsession with meetings. But if you start packing your schedule with private meetings for things like expressing milk but actually just planning your day is something I'm like, every one of us should be having time on our calendar for that. Like it just helps us really focus on why do we have all these synchronous meetings, which makes it easier for us to be flexible with our work as well. So it's just kind of taking this. I think one of the things that is happening is the society wants more flexible working, but also things like this push for the flexible working agenda. And it benefits everybody. My company is a flexible working. We're all over the world for starters. So there are no core hours, right? We're flexible working. We're a 4-day work week. My team is amazing.
That's awesome.
They produce so much because they have that flexibility and they don't work crazy hours. So they're not burnt out. They're not overthinking and always stressing. At least that's what I hope is true. They might correct me on that, but that's certainly the feedback I get. And you know what? We're a better company because of that choice. And we all need this. And it then helps us in this sort of situation as well, because it becomes a no-brainer to then fit this stuff in. Like, okay. We've gone through a lot of different things. Before we go on to the quickfire round, is there something you wish you'd known before you had your first child that you now know?
I mean, everything. I wish that I had, I often wish in my life that I had a guide. I wish I had a senior woman that could have guided me, you know, that could have acted as a mentor for me in so much of my life. And I never had that. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. My dad didn't have a white collar career and he was not home most of the time because he was away working. And so I didn't have that from my family. And then when I went through college and I started in the working world, I was like, oh, I feel like a fish out of water. You know, it'd be so lovely to have some sort of senior woman that I could go to and have that guidance. And so I think a lot of why I've built Leva the way I have and included all of the aspects that I have is because it's what I wish I had, you know, honestly, as a mom and as a corporate worker and as an executive leader. You know, I've had all of these different versions of myself as kind of I've grown through my life. And I think having holistic 360-degree support would have been amazingly helpful instead of having to piecemeal it all along the way. And so really it's just that like robust source of who can I talk to, who can support me, what's the true facts around like, how do I navigate the situation instead of having to figure it all out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. I love that. Okay, let's move on to the quickfire round.
Okay.
What is the worst piece of advice you've ever been given?
Okay, the worst piece of advice, and this is the worst piece of advice because I don't personally like this advice at all. It was to be a lighter version of yourself. And it was a woman leader that gave me this advice. She was my boss at the time, and I was seen as a high performer at this company. And so I had been chosen to go have dinner with our board of directors. And her advice for me before the board dinner was just be a lighter version of yourself. I was like, oh, well, that hurt.
Yeah.
And it was certainly not the first time I've gotten similar advice.
It's sort of, I mean, the thing is, right, there might be something there, but it's not useful. Like, what does it even mean? Like, what is it they're actually critiquing? If there's something, it's when people say, you know, you need to work on your executive presence. Great, but what does that mean? Like, there's a reason why I have a whole program on executive presence because it's a huge topic. Being lighter is kind of like the same thing. There's something about the way you're showing up, which is intimidating, which is a classic stereotypical thing against women. And that doesn't mean it shouldn't be worked on, but it's completely unhelpful. Like, that I would agree that is a terrible piece of advice. And by the way, I think you're amazing just the way you are.
Thank you.
Just in case you need to do it.
I agree. Same about you.
Thank you. What is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
So there was this Marine at USAA he's like kind of gone on to more and more senior leadership levels, but he was already a senior leader at the time. And I just absolutely loved him because he was so kind and funny and down to earth and just wanted to get stuff done. And so what he said is, he had several good quips, but this one was, if you think you're empowered to make a decision, you are. So basically, like, take accountability, take ownership, and get shit done. And I loved that. I loved that advice. It's like, okay, let's move on these things. Like, there was another guy who I used to work for that would always say, you know, you probably will make a better decision than I will because 70% of the time you're going to be right because you're closer to it. 10% of the time you'll be wrong. And 20% of the time we'd make the same decision. And I'm okay with losing 10% of the time. I was like, oh, that's cool. So both of those things kind of seem similar to me, but I just loved that, you know?
I love that too. I love that so much. Okay. What is the last book you read and would you recommend it?
Okay. So the last book was a series. We're still kind of in the middle of it, but it's called National Park Mystery Series. And so we're listening to the audio book because we take a lot of long drives as a family. And it's all about these 3 kids that are solving mysteries and doing scavenger hunts in national parks here in the US. So we're very excited about kind of like going and following in their tracks. And I would highly recommend it for a family. It's really fun.
Oh, I love that. I love that you're, given what we've been talking about, I love that you've got a family-friendly option there. Like ours, like when you said series, it's like the series I'm reading right now is not family friendly.
Oh no,
there's a few too many sex scenes in there. Let's just go with that, shall we? I'm like, no, not family. You couldn't have it in the car because you could, but it would be a way to have some interesting conversations that maybe you're not ready for.
Maybe you don't want to have, yeah.
I love that. I love that so much. I think that's the first kind of a deliberately family friendly recommendation we've had. I will make sure that is in the show notes for anybody who wants to check it out. What is your favorite mindset tip?
So I think as a woman in the workplace, and especially in tech where it can be so different and you can be one of very few, there are a lot of things that are going to trigger you or that you're going to be treated maybe unfairly and you're going to have a lot of rough moments. Speaking from experience, right? So I think one thing that helps me a ton and I think could help anyone is to make sure that if you're feeling triggered, you're feeling frustrated, you're feeling overwhelmed, you go and find a few minutes just for yourself of quiet time to breathe, to meditate, to kind of shut out the rest of the world, because then you'll just be able to go back into the fray in a much better headspace. And then the other thing that I really like is this acronym called SEE, which is separate, embrace, and evaluate.
Oh, I love that.
And basically what it says is, you know, when we have an emotion, anger, which is fine, right? Anger is a fine emotion, frustration, sadness, whatever, like, we are going to experience that emotion. It will take our body 90 seconds to process any emotion that we have. And so often I think as professionals, we try to ignore that emotion is there or push it down or push it to the side, which is really unhealthy. And it just kind of makes that emotion last longer. So C is separate from the emotion, which is really about recognizing that it's there. Like, oh, I'm feeling angry. That emotion is there. embrace that you're experiencing it. So let yourself feel it, give yourself a good minute and a half to feel it, and then evaluate. Why did I feel that way? What caused that emotion? Was it an appropriate emotion or was it not an appropriate reaction to that situation? But really think about it for a little bit rather than just letting it be something that kind of consumes you without any sort of evaluation. So I really like that as well.
Yeah, I love that. I talk about notice, pause, reframe. It's much the same thing. I notice the emotion, pause. As you say, it takes 90 seconds, 60 to 90 for the adrenaline or cortisol to leave your body. So you've got to pause and allow it to happen and then reframe it. I love that. It's just such a great way of us to like, you, as you say, you are going to experience this. It's okay to experience. What matters is how you deal with that afterwards. Like how you allow that experience to pass through you rather than pushing it down and pretending it's not something to pay attention to. Vanessa, this has been a fabulous conversation, and I'm sure much of the audience feel this way. So how can people find you online, connect with you, find out more about what Leva does? Like where can we find you?
Yeah, so you can find me. My email address is vanessa@levaapp.com, LEVAAPP.com. That is also our website, so check it out. And then you can always connect with me on LinkedIn. My name is Vanessa Jupe on LinkedIn.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I would love to get you to just give one final thought you would like to leave listeners with today. What do you think they will need to hear as a parting shot?
You know, it's funny. Before the show, you and I were talking about like introverts and being introverted and that sort of thing, which I think we both fall in that category. Although I think over the years, you know, as you have to work in the world, you realize you can't just sit behind a keyboard and code, unfortunately, although it would be lovely. You have to kind of get out there and get to know people. But I think there's so often we feel like we have to solve problems for ourselves. And so many of us really don't want to have to ask for help. But I would say the number one thing is just to be okay with realizing that you don't have to do it alone. Nothing in your life should ever happen alone. Like you are part of a huge, beautiful world full of humans, and we're here for each other. And so if you need help with something, don't struggle by yourself. And if you feel like you need more support for yourself, for your family, in your work world, reach out and get help, because that's what it's all about. At the end of the day, we're a social species, you know?
Love that so much. Love that. Love that. Love that. Love that. Listeners, I hope you found today's conversation inspiring, powerful, give you permission to feel all the feels about whatever life journey you're on, whether it's motherhood or something else. I think a lot of what we've talked about here is about a life journey and a big change. And I think it applies across the board. If you are feeling inspired by this, please do reach out to Vanessa. She has the most amazing resources. And it's just a superb human to share a little bit of your soul with if you need that support. But as always, until next time, remember, stay in your tech leadership game and follow your dreams, because the world really does need that uniqueness that you bring as a leading woman in tech.